Hello and welcome to episode 90 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. You have been waiting for our discussion of the season finale of House of the Dragon Season 2. And here we are, finally talking about it. Sam,
Yes.
this episode was pretty widely panned by a whole lot of people. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. So, this was episode 8, The Queen Who Ever Was. Tywin Lannister allies with the Triarchy, but must first defeat Admiral Sharako Lohar in mud wrestling. Larys urges Aegon that they hide in Bravos, where Harrenhall's gold is stashed, then reclaim the throne following the war. After long searching, Rhaena finds the wild dragon. Gawain confronts Criston, who regrets the war. A raid-fueled Aemond destroys Sharp Point with Vhagar. Rhaenyra, who hoped having more dragon riders would deter a conflict, declares war. Ulf's boorish behavior angers Jace. Alan rebuffs Corlys's attempts at reconciliation. Rhaenyra and Adam fly to Harrenhall after Simon Strong sends warning that Damon may be traitorous. Alice leads Damon to a weirwood tree where he foresees a future, including a White Walker and Daenerys Targaryen. Seeing himself as part of a larger story, he swears fealty to Rhaenyra. Helena refuses Aemon's demand to fly Dreamfire into battle and foresees that he will die in the war. Alicent secretly travels to Dragonstone, offering to surrender King's Landing to Rhaenyra in exchange for her and her family's safety. Rhaenyra insists Aegon must die to ensure the transition. Otto is briefly seen captive in a cell. The armies of the Reach, the North, the Westerlands, and the Riverlands, as well as the fleets of House Velaryon and the Triarchy, mobilize for war. Sean, you opened us up by saying this episode was widely panned. It was, I believe, according to I think Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb, the lowest rated episode so far of House of the Dragon. In our pre-recording conversation, though, you said that you kind of liked it. Please, what are we missing? Or I should say, what are critics missing?
I wouldn't say we, because I found individuals who also liked this episode. I think for me, we have a lot of instances of the show being slow this season. And I personally have complained about that between you and I, like on the recordings of these episodes.
And our millions of listeners. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was the episodes that I didn't like were slow. Not much was happening. And there wasn't really a whole lot of inter-character intrigue, conversations, character development, things like that. That was really kind of hooking me. But in this episode, yes, it was slow at times, but I really liked the interactions between Alicent and Rhaenyra. I liked, now that you read the description, the plot episode, the episode plot, the interaction between Alan and Corlys was great. So, and we got one more hallucination by Damon in Harrenhall, but at least it's coming to a solution. Like there's not any, I know I'm not going to get any more what seems to be pointless hallucinations. I feel like the whole Damon plotline, you could have had maybe 2 hallucinations, with this being like the peak where he finally realizes what's going on. Because now that like he's hit that point and he's like, yep, fealty to Rhaenyra and we're going to move forward. This is your army. All of that bullshit with him and his mom, him and young Rhaenyra, like all of those other hallucinations that he had just didn't seem like they mattered, especially now at the end with this last hallucination. Like to me, the last one in this episode, he sees White Walkers. He sees the future Targaryen dynasty that has dragons and takes down the White Walkers. And he sees his role within all of this. This is all you needed out of the Harrenhal hallucinations.
Yeah. It's
so
like, did you need the 8 other smaller hallucinations, or could you just have this one big one, or maybe this one plus like one conversation with Viserys? Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, I think, do you still think that a bottle episode featuring Damon's kind of descent into madness and then crawl out of madness, would that have been more effective than sprinkling these throughout multiple episodes?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
And for the most part, like that would have taken away a lot of that really slow feel of the entire season, because there was a lot of times where you felt like things were moving forward in other regions of Westeros,
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden they would just dump you at Damon, and it would be him walking around the halls at night and then having a hallucination where you're trying to figure out who the hell is he picturing,
Hmm.
and it was too much.
Well, let me agree with you to a certain extent. I agree that the conversations that we had this episode were they maintained the very high bar that this series has set for their two people talking in a room or a small group of people talking in a room. I, as I was watching the scene between Rhaenyra and Alicent toward the end of the episode, I was just struck by how well it's directed, how good the dialogue is, how well the actors are giving their performances. Emma Darcy is incredible as Rhaenyra. I don't want to slight any of the other actors; they're all very fine, but she rises to every occasion. Yeah, that conversation between Corlys and Alan was tough, right? That was again good acting, well written. Where some of those things fall short for me, especially the Alicent Rhaenyra conversation, is despite everything I'm seeing on screen and the way that the actors are performing, I didn't buy it. I didn't buy the premise that, again, a member of the royal family can leave King's Landing unseen, especially after we established earlier in the episode that every ship departing the harbor is now going to be inspected. She makes it to Dragonstone. She is admitted to Dragonstone. And then they have this conversation in which Alicent agrees that at least one of her sons is going to be killed in order to hand the throne over to Rhaenyra. And it just struck me as a little beyond what I am willing to believe. I think we talked a lot about the suspension of disbelief, right? Like, I'm with you on the dragons and the weirwood visions of the future and all that other stuff. But Alicent would have been held prisoner, and Rhaenyra would still have the advantage in the number of dragons, and now she would have the king's mother as a hostage, and she could just increase the fervent nature of her demands. And I didn't like it, and I think what the show has done really well up to this point, I think, is ground the political reality or ground itself in the political realities that the characters face. And I think that conversation there, I just didn't buy it that Alicent would do the things that she would did and agree to the things that she agreed to.
And I disagree with you on almost every one of your points that you made,
Oh wow.
because I think they set up Alicent's kind of turn with Rhaenyra going to King's Landing at the beginning of the season.
Hmm.
She plants the seed that maybe Alicent did indeed fuck up. Alicent then spends the whole season being ostracized from the council, realizing that her sons are both assholes. That one son basically tried to kill the other one to become king. Then she has the situation where Aemon burns Sharp's Point to the ground, and she points it out that just because his feelings were hurt, he like massacred a town. He's the one who's in power now, not Aegon. And Aemond also tried to force Helena into combat. So there's all of these different things over the course of the season that I think Alicent was finally like, you know what? This can't go on. So she has the conversation with Rhaenyra. And then even then, like, sure, capture Alicent. Is that really going to stop Aemond from he's already proven that Alicent has no role in the High Council. He burns sharp point to the ground. Like, I don't think having Alicent as a captive is going to stop their war effort from continuing. And the result of Alicent going to Dragonstone is a peaceful transfer of power in King's Landing. Rhaenyra doesn't have to go to King's Landing and burn half the population to get control of it. She can just move in. She's already laid the seeds of, I'm going to give them food and then switch favor over to me. So I mean, to me, that's why Alicent gets to leave because it's a peaceful transition of power instead
Mm-hmm.
of a siege or burning the shit down with Dragonflame.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and maybe the just or maybe what can square the circle for me is the fact that Alicent has been removed from the council, and she's not privy to the discussions that were going on in her absence. But there, it at least would it would make sense that she would at least acknowledge that there are other actors aside from herself and her sons who have a vested interest in the outcome of the war. For instance, the forces of the Reach, led by her other son, the Lannisters, both of whom are at play. One of whom is at the head of an army. Whoever, the people who are fighting for Rhaenyra, and this is where Rhaenyra might have brought this point up because she just came from her army. I was like, there's already fighting in the Riverlands. There are people marching from the north, and they might not be content with the outcome that those two have discussed. And the other thing is, like, Rhaenyra rightly acknowledges or rightly brings up the fact that she needs to eliminate her competition. And so they say, oh, a son for a son, like Aegon has to die. But there's other contenders, right? Aemond is still out there. Who's going to take out Aemond? There's still Darren, the other Targaryen prince, who we saw his dragon for the first time this episode. It's like, if he's as great as Gawain Hightower made him out to be, maybe people will rally around him. And now what you're doing is you're just going to prolong the war and just put up another claimant who actually has the ability to inspire people. Maybe, I don't know. I just think there are a lot of things that went unacknowledged in that conversation. Some of them can be explained away, but not all of them. And I think that's what was kind of bothering me about it. But we can agree to disagree on it. I think people come into it with different things in the back of their head, and I don't. We'll see how things go in season 3, because as we know, usually the things that people plan out or want to happen in this series do not transpire as they want it to. So I'm sure that even if they attempt to do this, it will go awry.
So we both agree that season 3 can't be slow.
Absolutely. I mean, they spent this entire season putting all these various armies and players on the board, and we got one battle, and it was an awesome spectacle. But season 3 might need to have multiple battles, at least if we're going based on what's in the books. And I kind of would have liked it if we had some sort of conflict in this episode, just to remind us of what the stakes are and to pay off some of this buildup over the course of this season.
I was happy enough with the payoff of the Riverland army and the culmination of Damon's bullshit. I was very happy that, to me, that was the same as an actual, like, physical conflict.
Yeah. It was
Personally,
kind of like
when he finally, like, his whole side plot was over and he, like, bends the knee. To me, I was, like, cheering from my couch. I was like, thank God this is finally done.
Yeah, that I was waiting for that to happen. And let's just say I was waiting about an hour and a half longer than I should have for that to happen, because my daughter woke up and then refused to fall back asleep. And so it was back and forth, Haley and I trying to put her down for an hour and a half. So that might have sucked out some of the payoff of that moment, but it was still pretty great to see him do it. And I think, and the one thing I should say this, the one thing I didn't like about that was like now Simon Strong decides to send a letter to Rhaenyra to be like, "Hey, things are a little suspicious here." Like, it did it really take that over him either observing or overhearing the conversation between Damon and Sir Alfred Broom to think that Damon might be less than loyal? Like, there's plenty of other instances of that.
Yeah, but I think at this point, I understood it because it seemed heightened because someone who was coming to Harrenhall at the direction of Rhaenyra from her council,
Yeah,
the first thing he does when he talks to Damon is we can overthrow the queen. So,
yeah,
like to me, it's like sure Damon, the king consort, whatever, one individual doing this, and then when someone else very close to the queen comes and also is starting to talk about treason, like to me,
okay,
that's when
yeah, that
he's
makes
he's
sense. That makes
he's
sense.
finally like, whoa,
Yeah.
okay, you really might need to come here and
So
deal with
then,
this.
so then the fact that we had this conversation between Damon and Alfred Broom, and then Damon bends the knee to Rhaenyra and reaffirms his loyalty, shouldn't Damon immediately be like, "You're under arrest"?
Yeah, and we might get that eventually because
Yeah,
in that scene when everybody bends the knee and then gets up cheering, he slowly like slinks away
yeah, I saw that. I was like,
from everybody.
yeah,
So maybe that will eventually come where in the beginning of season 3 like they're trying to, or like it'll be his execution or something, I don't know,
yeah,
but
yeah. I could see him becoming kind of like a, well,
a
yeah, we'll see what
green
happens.
spy.
Something like that, or I mean, depending on how quickly things in the Riverlands progress, like maybe he's like a wanted man, but he
Mm.
escapes because of the chaos of like an incoming battle or something. Like, a Vagar is spotted on the horizon, and they're like, okay, we got to deal with that issue, and then he, in the meantime, gets away.
Rhaena's
All right,
Dragon Quest.
yeah, I so this episode, this kind of infuriated me, and this wasn't the we saw the dragon, we saw her kind of wander off the road in the end of the previous episode. But this time, this episode shows Reyna kind of wandering alone through the Vale on a quest for this wild dragon. And the reason it doesn't make any sense to me is that she is has basically abandoned the three small children that she was supposed to kind of be, guard. She was the designated guardian of the three children, all of whom are heirs to the throne potentially in line after Jace. And we don't get any acknowledgement of her doing that. Like, yeah, there's nursemaids and stuff like that, but she was told that she was in charge. She wanders into the wilderness with like not even a coat. It just seems a little odd. I don't know. It would have been maybe just as effective if the dragon had confronted the group of them as they were like leaving the Eyrie, and she, in a moment of like desperation, did something similar to what Hugh did, and like put herself in front of the dragon, and then there was like a bonding or something like that. But I was not a fan of this. It seems like she's characterized as like now overly obsessed with owning a dragon to the point where she endangers others that she was supposed to be protecting, and also really endangers herself. I didn't like it.
No, it was the scenes with her were dumb. Like running through, why was she running? Like
Yeah,
there were
yeah.
scenes of her like they would cut to her in like this rocky barren land and she was like out of breath. And then there was the moment where she found a stream and then she ran to the stream and started like guzzling water. I'm like, man, you so unprepared
Yeah,
for just
didn't even
like,
have like a water skin. Yeah,
yeah, she was wearing like ladies dress that you would wear in court. Like she's
yeah.
not equipped to be like out running around. Yeah, I don't know. It was weird.
If they wanted to make that sequence a little more interesting, there should have been some some danger to her other than the dragon. And like, yeah, we get it, dragons are dangerous, but I don't think anybody would believe that she's going to go through this whole subplot just to be burned horribly in the wilderness by a dragon and killed. So like, have her confront a predator, or have her like need to hide from some mountain clansmen, like the ones that attacked Tyrion and Catelyn in Game of Thrones. Have Rhaena be menaced by some mountain clansmen. and just to give us a little bit of excitement instead of just wandering through the wilderness getting Giardia.
Mm-hmm. We had a really random scene that showed Otto being captive. And I haven't read the book. And this is the one of the few times that I'm going to want a spoiler from you in case this is in the books. So if you are not caught up on the novel and you don't want to know, you can mute for a second. But who has him captive?
It's
Or do you not know?
I do not know. This is not in the book.
Interesting.
The last we heard, he was going to Highgarden to rally the
Basically,
Tyrells.
yeah, and basically mentor his
Yes,
grandson, right?
yes,
Yeah.
and that was what he was supposed to do. There was a passing reference to fighting in the Reach. Remember Lord Beesbury? I think the guy who was head was smashed on the table by Kristen Cole.
Mm-hmm.
I think there it was. I think it was referenced that his house was fighting some faction of the Greens
Mm-hmm.
near their fief, and so maybe they like intercepted Otto and took him captive. That was my one thought. Like it's either them or maybe like remember the bald guy who was hung or hanged because he tried to escape.
No, I don't remember the hung bald guy.
No, Mr. Caswell, the guy who like tried to escape on horseback from the Red Keep right at the end of the first season.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe something similar with like his family took Otto captive. I didn't like that either. I was like, oh, the first time I at the beginning of the episode, I saw Rhys Ifans' name in the credits. I was like, oh, we're gonna get Otto again. And then it was all the way at the end, and he's like, yeah, in a cell. Didn't care for it.
For legit 2-3 seconds.
Yeah.
We have the triarchy stuff. Now, you got yelled at because you're too loud. So I'm going to do some talking here and
There
just
you go.
kind of
Yeah.
speak your point of view on this. But this whole plot line in this episode was unnecessary, and I think it seemed out of place, like the humor of it. And you mentioned before that this episode would have been better served not in the season finale, or at least this plot line would have been better served not in the season finale. And I mean, how many was it? 2 episodes ago, we got Eamon saying, "Recruit the triarchy to
Mm-hmm.
go."
Mm-hmm.
So you could have had this in episode 7 instead of episode 8. You could have cut out some of the Damon Harrenhall shit to fit this in a previous episode.
You could also have cut all of this triarchy stuff down significantly. There's a ton of wasted
Yeah.
screen time.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not going to say much more about it other than it's just another army or another piece of the puzzle on the move.
Can I
And now you have the Valerian fleet besides like the Lannisters or the few ships that they had, but now you have like a full naval force to go
yeah.
up against the Valerians.
Like it will be cool. Like it'll be fun to see a medieval sea battle at some point in season 3. The thing that I really didn't like about this triarchy, those scenes, was that it really smacked of late Game of Thrones, where Dan and Dave are completely off book and they're coming up with stuff, and we get a mud wrestling scene, and I want you to impregnate all of my wives dialogue, where there's better ways to show. I don't know. There's better ways to make Thailand uncomfortable. Like you don't need to go to such great extent. And then I didn't buy this admiral character. It was all too goofy. And like you said, the humor was not well placed in the final episode of the season.
Also, it gets confusing with all the twins. Because for like when the scene first started, I was like, wait a minute. This guy is on his way to Harrenhall with an army. What's he doing? And then I was like, oh, they're twins.
Yeah.
That makes
and
sense.
and just this is a tiny little nitpick, but he's not master of ships, he's master of coin. And that happened earlier this season, so there's just a slight like continuity thing there. But yeah, I also think that the episode should not have opened with the triarchy stuff if they were going to play it for such humor, because you cut from that to Aemond burning down a whole city. And it was just like a weird, it was a weird way to open the episode, and it was just strangely juxtaposed to the other heavy stuff that we get.
Last point to discuss: Gawain the Green Knight. You know, as we've discussed House of the Dragon, I'm finding it really annoying how bad George R. R. Martin is at coming up with names. It's maddening. Gawain, the Green Knight. Like, come on, man. Sesame Street bullshit. Just be original. Come up with character names. His map is the UK and Ireland
Oh
on
yeah,
top of each other.
I
Like,
saw that. I saw that on social media over the weekend. I was like, yeah, yeah.
but I saw that people were talking about that during Game of Thrones. This was
Oh
like
yeah, no, it's
years
well
ago.
established. Yeah,
But it's like
it pops out
you
every now and then.
you might be a good writer, but be a little bit more original with your names and maps and things like that. Okay, I got that off my chest.
Point taken.
Uh, Gawain and Kristen. Why does Gawain confront Kristen, and with what evidence? Now, I think my only insight into this is Allison's little, what do you want to call it?
Handkerchief, her
Hank,
favor.
her kerchief. Yeah. But I think that could have far more romantic, sensual undertones, like having the favor of a lady. And I think that is what he's going off of. And it's not,
Sure.
and it's outside of like a tournament. Like this is like, I'm going to war. So it probably has a different connotation than, you know what I mean? Anyway,
Yeah.
those are my
No,
thoughts.
I mean,
Like
I get it. I think it was, and Kristen Cole didn't shy away from the fact that he's he has an inappropriate relationship with Allison, but also it's like he was her sworn protector for 15 years. And if you're going to ask anybody for their favor when you go into battle, if you're at all superstitious or whatever, it would make sense that it's the person that you've protected with your life day in and day out every year for the past decade and a half. I just thought it was like the escalation was rather strange, right? Like Gawain walks up to him with his sword already out and they're in public. It just seemed a little odd that it came out of nowhere. Like, I think it would have been better served with a conversation wherein Kristen Cole either slips up or relates the fact that he has this inappropriate relationship because he is kind of in his hopeless place. And then Gawain escalates with threats of violence, but then they come back down again. It moved too quickly. And that was the thing that just, it again, is like where it ended was fine, but it didn't need to start where it was.
it definitely feels like if we would have gotten like a hour 40-minute long episode, some of the
A
dialogue,
fucking feature movie.
yeah, some of the dialogue that was cut, I feel like would have clarified some things. But then again, like we've said about previous episodes, it just feels like they're, and with season one in particular, it felt like they were trying to cram way too much into these seasons. Like
Mm-hmm.
they were dictated like, all right, House of the Dragon is only going to be 5 seasons. So now they're like, okay, well, this all has to happen in season one. This all has to happen in season two. So then you start to lose things and they cut things. And
Well, this was only an 8 episode season, right? They could have done 9. It's not as if they shot their wad on a gigantic battle, right? There was no battle of the Blackwater or battle at the Wall that is going to eat up a bunch of their budget. And based on how well season 1 was received, I have to imagine they could have gotten at least another 60 minutes if it was just going to be some additional conversations and then maybe a small battle. So I don't know. I didn't care for some of these scenes, and I didn't think that the episode ended very. It didn't end the season on a strong footing, And it's unfortunate because there were, I think just last episode, I was saying that this might be like the best episode of a Game of Thrones television show that I've seen in a decade or something like that. And then we kind of get this and it just falls flat. And I realize that the critical response has been mixed at best. I think this is a low rated episode. And obviously there were things that were great, but yeah, a lot of it just didn't come through for me like the way I wanted it to.
And that's everything we have for episode 90 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. You can follow us on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things Podcast. You can send us emails at elvesringsnerdythings@gmail.com. Next week, or in a couple days, I don't know. We'll see how this plays out. We're really fucked up with our episode timing, but we will have an episode where we kind of recap the entire season a little bit more. May have a special guest for that one. And then we've got some time we got to kill. Only like 2 weeks before we get the first episode of season 2 of Rings of Power, which I am ready to be heard again. I'm starting to buy into it a little bit.
Hey, that second trailer was effective in getting me excited for Rings of Power. So I'm not so naive to think that will I will fall in love, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
All right, bye everybody.